What we thought we would do over the next 10 minutes is take some questions from people about what you've heard and have a discussion.
It's not so much a question for Iain, it's a question for the group based on what Iain said. You were given it all where you're born and where you own the land. I want to know how many of us are actually true born leavers and who have just come to Leith and decided that this is where we live now, rather than our home. We made it our home. Do you see the subtle difference? And that's the thing. So how many of us are true leavers? True born. No. There's only two of us, and the very left of us have just come here and say, 2, 3, sorry, I was here. Okay. So that's just the power of it. We've come together in where we now live to say that we're going to change where we are now. Just thought that was the point. So thank you.
Can I just say something? In Alistair McIntosh's book, The Soil and Soul, which I don't know if anyone has read, but which I found a really amazing, moving, inspiring book, he talks about digging where you live and digging where you are, just starting from where you are and going from there. Because in this, as a person who's moved around as a child tons, I don't have a homeland, but I can start from where I am.
It's easy to become a crofter if you have a growing background in per se, and is the crofting community expanding or is it shrinking? And is it newcomers coming in who need a different, better way of life, or is it like yourself coming back to your roots?
Thank you. Yes, they're all very pertinent questions and live issues in Crofting. And I think they also relate to what the lady there was saying in terms of access to land. I'm fortunate. In the moment, I'm not a crofter. My father's a crofter. I'm living and working in England, at the University of Coventry, for a Centre for Agroecology there. So, again, to do with small-scale farming systems and land rights. But I'm fortunate in knowing that I do have access to land because it's in our family. That's not the case for many young people, both from within the crofting areas and from out of the crofting areas. And for historical and legislative reasons, which I won't go into the details of, but particularly in the 1950s and 1960s, there was a series of bits of parliamentary legislation that made it much easier to buy and sell croft land. And so what's happening now is that the majority of land is being sold on the market, and it's being sold to people with money, and so young people are being priced out. What's happening there in an encouraging way is in the last year, in March, the Crofting Federation held a gathering of young crofters, so invited young crofters to attend, and they've now set up a young crofters group, and they're beginning to agitate for exactly these kinds of issues. And it's something that the Federation, and again I'm not speaking on behalf of the Federation, but I'm relaying what I know, is that for several years they've been making this call for the rapid expansion of crofting throughout Scotland, because they're aware that there is a demand for land among young people, and that demand doesn't just exist in the Highlands and Islands. A lot of young people would like to have more access to the land in the Lothians. It's the problem. The problem with that is the crofting system was set up as an interference in the free market in land, and to establish a system that devalues land in the Lothians, where land is most concentrated and the most powerful landowners exist, it's a real legislative task. And I think it requires the kind of coming together that Evie was at this week in Edinburgh, where Nourish and a whole network of groups, including the Crofting Federation, are saying this is a long-term project. We're not going to get this in the next year or two. The government has too many competing lobbying interests. And maybe one way of doing that is through the cap, is doing something radical with the cap that then filters down. Instead of us fighting up to the government, stuff comes down from Europe to say, your land system is wrong, there needs to be more access for people, there needs to be more support and education. But those are
These are times because it's money that's very controlled, whatever. You know, to take a loan,
exactly.
You know,
But
to get there.
the story of Crofting and the story of land reform in the Highlands, and that's ongoing. So there's just been a case going through the court system in Scotland on the island of Lewis, a place called Park, where the crofters used in the recent land reform legislation. There was a special crofting community right to buy, where under most of the land reform legislation, if you want to buy land, there has to be a willing seller. But if you belong to a crofting community, you have a right to buy the croft land, including all the common land, so it can be quite big areas, even if there's not a willing seller. And this was being contested by the landlords, went all the way through the court system. It took the crofters 10 years, a huge amount of expense, a huge amount of money, but they won. So yes, there are huge vested interests, but there's also a counterforce that can achieve things. And so I think it's worth putting our energy towards that as well, because it is the force that works.
That leads me to something that I'm really interested in.
Talking stick.
It's symbolic.
I'm really interested in community ownership in the Highlands and Islands, and what you think the main benefits are for the community of owning their land for both like contact with the rest of Scotland and for sustainable rural development. Yeah, like what for you to say are the main benefits of the community owning their own land?
There are multiple benefits, and again, the experts on this are a group called Community Land Scotland, and they have work on their website. You can access reports which show some of the more tangible benefits. So the economic benefits, the fact that freeing up land in that way means that, again, communities can get together to discuss and decide on what they would like to do with it. I think one of the clearest examples is Egg, where among the things that they've done is to set up their own. They weren't connected to the grid, so all their power was from diesel generators, fuel coming in from the mainland. And once they got themselves together after the buyout and began to organise, they now have their own renewable grid, and it's a mix of different renewable technologies, and that's a huge benefit to them. But not only that, and I think more deeply, is it brings people together. You have to go through that process. I know in Egg they went through a few really shaky years after the buyout because it was a huge change in power. Power now resided within the island rather than in a landlord who lived in Yorkshire or Germany or wherever, and they had to work that through. And there's lots of difficulties and potential pitfalls in that, and they went through a lot of them. But they came out the other end, and they're now, I think they're flying in a lot of ways. And they'll probably go through that process again at some other point, but they'll have learned ways to work together, hopefully to get through that. And I think part of the benefit of being part of groups like Community Land Scotland and the Crofting Federation is when that stuff comes up, as it probably will here, and it may have come up already, is you can go to others. Again, you're not on your own. Other folk are going through the same stuff or similar stuff that you can draw on. So there's multiple benefits. But for me, it's the social benefits, it's the benefit to people that really is at the heart of it.
Just thinking about the internet, the islands had always been so cut off, and now that there's the internet and the world is smaller than communication, is that empowered? Obviously it has empowered, so do you think to continue, this is going to be much easier? Is this way forward to go to pressure groups out there?
I think it's one factor, yeah, and I think it's been a positive factor, and I think it's enabled a lot of young people to stay home or to return home because their work involves information technology, and there is, I don't know, because I'm not particularly technologically gifted, and I'm not living in the Highlands at home, but I think the Highlands Wales Enterprise have been active in trying to get quite a good broadband connection for some of these communities. I don't think it's really happened in the Western Isles yet, but in some of the mainland island areas. And from speaking to Patrick at the Crofting Federation, he lives out in Rosewell, and he says that he does a lot of work in the Scottish Parliament, but he says that the internet connection in many parts of the rural Highlands is a lot better than in Rosewell. So it's not just a Highlands and Islands issue, it's an issue in the lowlands of Scotland as well.
Do you think that there's a lot of community groups in cities who are kind of missing like a tree, not seeing themselves as a craft? Because it's quite inspiring to hear you talk about this community group as a true craft. But there are so many groups like this throughout Edinburgh and the central part. They benefit in different ways by actually seeing themselves as a craft.
I think that's probably for this group to answer. Does it give this group something? Does it benefit this group to consider itself in that way? As an outsider, as someone coming in, my feeling is that there's different ways of understanding crofting, and I think in three ways. There's legislatively, and legislatively this is not croft, because crofting is limited to 7 crofting counties in the Highlands and Islands, and it starts in 1886. So legislatively is one way of seeing it, it's the narrowest way of seeing it. And then there's politically, and crofts began to come into the Highlands after Culloden. They were being, the people who are now crofters didn't want to be crofters when they were turned into crofters. It was a redistribution of land into small holdings, latterly to keep people on so they could go into kelping or they could do ancillary industries. It wasn't enslavement, but it was almost a form of indentured labour. And so that, in that sense, you probably wouldn't want to be a crofter. And crofters didn't want to be crofters, which is why they agitated and got the law changed and got their conditions of tenure changed into something that was more applicable to the way they thought. The deepest way of seeing crofting to me is culturally. It's a way of relating to land, it's a way of relating to place. And that's diverse, it means something different in Leith than it does in Lake Melm or Ullapool or whatever. It means something very different, and I should make this clear. It means something very different in Shetland than it does in Skye. They have very different traditions. We're still crofters, but they have a much stronger, whereas our tradition comes out of the sense of dúchas, in Shetland their tradition comes out of the sense of údal, which is much more focused on the individual. And the interesting thing is that in the last 40 years, since crofters have had the right to buy, in the Western Isles where the sense of dúchas is strongest, only 5% of crofts have been bought. In Shetland, where the sense of údal is strongest, about 80 or 90% of crofts have been bought. And that's that old, in my opinion, that's that old way of thinking about land coming out. And so what it's going to be in Leith is going to be something different again. But to me, my own view is I think yes, Tom, I think there is something to be said for that, because it allows people to connect to something that belongs here. It belongs to the Highlands, it belongs to Lowlands, it belongs to Edinburgh, Crofton Ree. I know I was walking into Newbattle Abbey from Rosewell one day, and I walked past a croft that was written on the side of an old farm building. Clearly some crofting past there as well. So there's something to tap into. And also it belongs to Britain as a whole. I'm living in Coventry at the moment. There's a huge IKEA in the middle of Coventry. It's on Croft Loan. And there's 100 crofts. There's 3 or 4 references to crofting in the placings there. And I think it's something deep. I think it's something indigenous to draw in that language that we can draw on. So my view is, yes, but my view is not really important. What's important is the view of the different groups here who had a chance to connect with that and engage with that.
Iain, do you want to talk a bit about what the croft, how that has, what kind of perception you found with using the press?
But I think that probably the most recent thing that I can probably draw on is the last consultation that we had, which we decided to ask the question, what does the croft mean to you? And from that, the feedback that we got, which we're still writing up, I think Angela's maybe not here at the moment, but Angela's actually writing a bit that up and is wrote a bit about too, and we've also got that question over here. It seems to be a recurring question we want to keep asking, because some of the statements that we got from the people were that the Croft is a place where parents love to come along with their children, because the children go away and play with other children and they're gone the whole day, and that means that parents can relax and talk to their friends and work together with their friends and do gardening and learn together in a really relaxed way, which means that actually children, often you hear in the city parents complaining about being in the supermarket with their toddlers and the toddlers on the floor and crying, and you hear parents say that they're just going to do the same thing as a toddler because it's just really, really challenging to be around the supermarkets and shopping with small children. And so I think what came over really strongly when we asked that question was just how it was changing people's well-being living within the city. That actually it was enhancing the well-being of the children and the families and the people that were connecting. And also, I suppose, I bring this one up a lot actually, when we started doing guerrilla gardens around Leith, some of the really interesting things were that neighbours had lived beside each other for 15 years and never spoke to each other once, and then all of a sudden you had a community garden in their back garden, in their back green, and all of a sudden they were eating together, they were sharing stories, sharing their learning. These people had walked past each other for 15 years, they recognised their faces but had never once decided to speak. But if you've got land, you've got an activity, it's outdoors, then that's actually breaking down some kind of isolation that is within living in the city. So that's two probably the really strong kind of reoccurring themes that I get, that we get in our feedback from people, is the Crofts actually means a lot to people, and actually it's enhancing people's time living in the city, which can often feel really busy, and people are working a lot just to pay their mortgage and pay their bills and get to school, and it's often, I think it taps into that notion where life kind of slows down quite considerably in the Croft. And I was at another event a couple of weeks ago, which is about deconsumerisation. Is that even a word? I'm not sure. Deconsumption. So the other thing that parents really enjoy is that they can spend the whole day in the Croft and they don't have children tugging at their clothes to buy this sweetie or that sweetie or this plastic gun or whatever it is that's in the shops. So you're away from that whole consumption. Where people can't really get away from it, so that's a nice break in that. The sweeties over there. Yeah, so that's so the Croft. What I'm trying to say, I suppose, is the Croft means a great deal to people, and I'm taking Iain's point that the Croft is a Croft. It is a real Croft because it's got people who are coming together and are accessing land and growing their food together. I think there seems to be a competing kind of argument that it's not a Croft until you've got some animals living there, which we're not in a position to do at the moment, but it's still very much a Croft to us, and we're very much interested in the history of Crofting and what it means to people. Does that answer? Can I say anything more? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah. I think it's also given us a bit of a license to be creative with how it's run and how we approach it, and how people are involved and how people are able to express themselves and say what it means to them, but how they want it to be in a way that, had we called it an allotment for a community garden, there might have been a lot of assumptions made about how it was going to work with those words, and whereas in the Croft it brings the idea of community and community ownership in.
I'll just say on top of that actually having 2 acres over Lithlings Park actually brings up loads of creative ideas about things that we can do. So obviously the charity is called Crofting Pots, and I met a girl quite recently who was a potter, and for some reason we've never ever thought of the idea of having pots but all of a sudden this idea is kind of germinating where we're going to have maybe perhaps have a kiln over on the croft where people can come and make pots and they can get their compost and then they can plant up their herbs. So that's croft puzzle. The ideas like that just keep growing, but it's access to land that gives people the ability to have that. We've got access to space where we've got free run to kind of create this project, and it's just it's a very.
Can I say that I'm a member of the Crofting?
Yeah.
Established over the last 4.5 years, Crofting secret garden.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to ones who have the ideas or the way that we think about it, I would say that we share the very same ideas, but I wouldn't have referred to us
As a crop.
as a crop.
Well, and that taps into the gentleman's question about, there is a big resurgence in community gardens all over Edinburgh, and perhaps they're all crofters or have that kind of crofting culture within them and are in many ways grappling with the same issues that we in Leith are trying to address. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities in all these different groups.
I'm the minister of the church here, and in the service tomorrow, Michael Northcott's going to be speaking. He's Professor of Ethics in the University. About his book, Place Ecology and Sacred, so looking at the ethics and the spirituality of land use and land reform and community ownership of lands. So,